The bulldozer's engine was still running when Regina Voss climbed out of her white Range Rover, clipboard tucked under one arm, sunglasses pushed up into blonde hair that never moved in the wind. "That windbreak is an eyesore, Mr. Hutchins," she said, not even looking at me. "The board voted 6-1, it's coming down today." Behind her, a man in an orange vest was already running a chainsaw through the trunk of a cottonwood my great-grandfather planted in 1923. 99 years old, that tree, gone in 4 minutes. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happens next. That windbreak wasn't landscaping. It was 127 trees, 4 rows deep, running a quarter mile along the only road in or out of Cedar Hollow Ranch Estates. My family built that road, my family planted those trees, and on that particular Tuesday in October, the Hollow Creek Homeowners Association cut every single one of them down to put in a decorative lawn behind the new clubhouse. Regina Voss called it Premium Mountain Views in the sales brochures, $300,000 extra per lot for lots with a clear sightline to the peaks. She sold 14 of them that winter. By the time the first blizzard came through in December, there was nothing left standing between Cedar Hollow and 40-mile-an-hour winds screaming off open range. No trees, no windbreak, no snow fence, just flat, bare ground and one narrow road that used to sit in the lee of 100 years of pine and cottonwood. The drifts that formed on that road stood 11 feet high, sealed 41 houses shut. One woman's oxygen delivery truck couldn't get within a mile of her front door. By the time this story is over, Regina Voss will owe more money than she has ever seen in her life, and almost none of it will be for the trees. It'll be for something she never bothered to check before she picked up that chainsaw. Something buried in a filing cabinet in the county recorder's office since 1971. I didn't say a word to her that day. I just wrote down the time, 2:14 p.m., Tuesday, and I started taking pictures. My name is Dale Hutchins. I'm 67 years old, and I have lived on this ranch my entire life, same as my father did, same as his father before him. The place is called Hutchins Ranch, 420 acres of hay ground and range at the base of the Bridger foothills, and it was homesteaded in 1899 by my great-grandfather Eli Hutchins, a Norwegian immigrant who came west with nothing but a mule, a rifle, and enough stubbornness to last 3 generations. Eli built the house with lodgepole pine he cut himself. He built the kitchen table by hand the same year, 1899, out of a single slab of black walnut, and that table still sits in my kitchen today, scarred with knife marks from 4 generations of Hutchins children doing their homework and shelling peas on it. You can smell the old varnish if you put your nose right down to the grain, mixed now with coffee rings and diesel from my work gloves, because I never remember to take them off before I sit down. Eli's the one who planted the windbreak. He didn't do it for a view, he did it because he'd watched 2 neighbors lose their whole herds in a ground blizzard in 1911, cattle just walking off the edge of a snowbank into a coulee they couldn't see, and he decided no Hutchins was ever going to lose stock or freeze to death because the wind had a clear run at his house. He planted cottonwood, blue spruce, and Russian olive in staggered rows, thick as a hedge, running the length of what was then a wagon road and later became the county access road when the land got subdivided in the 70s. 3 generations of my family are buried on a rise behind that house, under a stand of aspen that somehow the county never touched. Eli, his son Magnus, my grandfather, my father, Roy. I go up there most mornings with coffee, just to sit. You can hear the wind different up on that rise, softer, broken up by the trees. Same trick Eli figured out with the windbreak, just working on gravestones instead of a house. My father left me the ranch outright in 1994. No strings, no partners, just a 1-page will that said, "The land goes to Dale, he'll know what to do with it." I didn't figure I'd spend my 60s fighting a homeowners association over trees my great-grandfather planted before the state of Montana had paved roads. But that's exactly where I ended up, because in 2003, the family that used to own the land around us sold 600 acres to a developer, and that developer built Cedar Hollow Ranch Estates, 41 houses, a clubhouse, a man-made pond, and a homeowners association board that decided 19 years later that my windbreak was standing between them and a marketing photo. Regina Voss became HOA president in 2019. She's 54, drives that white Range Rover with the vanity plate reading HOLLOW1, and she has never once, in 3 years, shown up to a board meeting in anything but a blazer that costs more than my truck payment. She carries a clipboard everywhere, even to the mailbox, like she's perpetually inspecting something. Before Cedar Hollow, she'd worked 15 years in real estate development down in Denver, and from what I later learned, she'd left 2 other HOA presidencies right around the time state auditors started asking questions. She had a talent, I'll give her that, a talent for making theft look like progress. I found that out slow, the way you find out a barn's got termites. You don't see it until you lean on the wrong post and your hand goes clean through the wood. That October afternoon, I stood at the edge of my own fence line and watched a man I'd never met drop the 3rd cottonwood in the row, and I felt something in my chest go cold and quiet, the way it does right before you do something you can't take back. But I didn't do anything, not then. My neighbour, Arlene Kowalski, came out onto her porch when she heard the chainsaws. Arlene's 78, a widow, lost her husband Frank to a heart attack 6 years back, and she's got a little green oxygen tank she wheels behind her everywhere she goes, tubing looped over her ears. Frank flew helicopters in Vietnam. Arlene still keeps his flag folded on the mantle. "Dale," she called across the fence, voice thin over the sound of the saws. "Did they tell you they were doing this?" "No, ma'am," I said. "Found out same time you did." She looked at the trees coming down, then back at me, and I could see something behind her eyes. Fear, maybe, or just the tired recognition of a woman who'd already been pushed around by that board more than once. Regina had cited Arlene twice that year, once for a garden gnome the HOA covenant apparently forbade, once for grass a half-inch over the approved height, a height Arlene physically couldn't reach anymore with her arms the way they were. "They're going to regret this," Arlene said. Not loud, just certain. The way old people say true things without needing to raise their voice. I didn't answer her. I just took out my phone, the same one my granddaughter had set up for me, and I started taking pictures. The stumps, the trucks, Regina's clipboard, the timestamp glowing in the corner of every frame. 2:14, 2:19, 2:31. I didn't say a word to anybody that whole afternoon. I just watched and I wrote. And I let Regina Voss believe she'd won something. 9 days after they cut the windbreak, a certified letter showed up in my mailbox. I remember the date because I wrote it on the envelope before I even opened it. Same habit my father taught me. October 23rd, 11:40 a.m. Delivered by Dolores from the post office, who apologized before she even handed it to me. "I don't like being the one who brings you this stuff, Dale," she said. Inside was a notice from the Hollow Creek Homeowners Association, signed by Regina Voss, president. It cited Covenant Section 4.3c, Maintenance of Scenic Corridors, and informed me that the stumps remaining along the access road constituted unsightly debris detrimental to community property values. I was ordered to grind and remove all 127 stumps within 10 days, at my own expense, or face a fine of $250 per week, retroactive to the date of removal. Retroactive to the date they cut them down. I read that letter 3 times standing in my own driveway, and I felt something a lot of men my age feel and don't talk about enough. A hot, clean kind of anger that doesn't want to shout, it wants to work. I folded the letter along its original creases, put it in a manila folder, and wrote the date and time on the tab. Then I got in my truck and drove to the clubhouse. Regina was in the little office they'd built off the pool house, sitting behind a glass desk with nothing on it but a laptop and a bowl of glass stones. She looked up when I came in, and I watched her decide, in about half a second, that I wasn't worth standing up for. "Mr. Hutchins," she said, "I assume you got our notice." "I did," I said. "You cut those trees down." "The board voted," she said, like that was an answer to something. We can't have dead cottonwood stumps along the entrance road. It's a liability, and frankly, it's an eyesore, same as the trees were. Those trees were 100 years old, I said. She smiled at me the way you'd smile at a child asking why the sky was blue. And now they're not there anymore. The board feels the community is better served by a clean sightline to the mountains. You'll want to get those stumps handled before the fines accrue further, Mr. Hudgens. I'd hate for this to become a lien issue. I didn't raise my voice. I want that understood, because I think that's part of what unravels people like Regina Voss. They expect the yelling. They've built their whole strategy around outlasting an angry man. I just looked at her and said, "You'll have my response in writing," and I left. That night I sat at my grandfather's black walnut table with the manila folder open in front of me, a cup of coffee going cold at my elbow, and I started doing what any rancher with sense does when trouble shows up at his fence line. I went looking for the paper. Here's what most homeowners don't know and what I didn't fully understand myself until that folder got about 2 inches thick. An HOA's covenants only bind land that was properly platted and recorded as part of the association's governing documents. If a parcel, or even a strip of a parcel, never got conveyed into that plat, the covenants don't apply to it, no matter what some board thinks they can enforce. It doesn't matter what the fine notice says, it matters what the recorder's office has on file. So I drove into the county seat, into a building that smells like old paper and radiator heat no matter the season, and I asked the recorder, a patient woman named Carol Spear, who'd known my father, to pull every document tied to the original 1971 subdivision plat for what became Cedar Hollow Ranch Estates. It took her most of an afternoon. What she found took me longer to understand and longer still to believe. When my great-grandfather's original homestead got split up over the generations, some sold off to the Pruitt family, who later sold to the developer. The surveyor in 1971 made an error. Or maybe it wasn't an error at all. Maybe somebody just got lazy. A 60-foot strip running along both sides of the old wagon road, the exact strip where the Windbreak stood, was never actually conveyed out of the original Hutchins parcel. It stayed attached to my family's deed the whole time, generation after generation, while the road itself, a separate, narrower ribbon down the middle, got dedicated to the county and later folded into what everyone assumed was HOA-maintained right-of-way. In other words, the trees the HOA cut down weren't on association land. They weren't on county land. They were on mine. Under Montana Code Annotated, Section 7016-201, cutting timber on another person's land without consent isn't a fine you can send in a letter. It's timber trespass, and the statute allows for treble damages, 3 times the value of the timber destroyed. 127 mature trees, some of them cottonwoods over 90 feet tall, valued by a forestry appraiser I hired out of Bozeman at just under $4,000 apiece for their windbreak and shade value alone. That was my small shield. I sat with that number for a long while that night. Over $1.5 million in trebled damages, more than enough to make Regina Voss's fine notice look like the joke it was. And I felt something close to peace for the first time in 9 days. Then Carol Spear called me back 3 days later, and the ground moved again. "Dale," she said, "while I had that file out, I pulled the amended plats too, since you were in here anyway. You're going to want to see the sales contracts on file for the new lots, the ones facing the ridge." I drove back in that same afternoon. What she'd found was a stack of 14 purchase agreements, all signed within 4 months after the windbreak came down. Every single one carrying an addendum titled Premium View Corridor Adjustment, an extra $60,000 per lot, sometimes more, tacked onto the base price because the buyer would now enjoy, and I'm quoting the marketing language here, unobstructed panoramic mountain vistas following recent community beautification improvements. 14 lots, $60,000 each minimum, some as high as $72,000. I added it up sitting in Carol's little side office with a county pencil, and I got $840,000, give or take, All of it collected in the 5 months after Regina Voss cut down a windbreak my great-grandfather planted to keep his neighbour's cattle from freezing to death. And that wasn't all of it. Tucked behind the sales contracts was a separate document, a landscaping services agreement between the Hollow Creek HOA and a company called Silver Peak Grounds and Design for clubhouse lawn installation and irrigation, billed at nearly double the going county rate. The contract was signed by Regina Voss as president. The registered agent for Silver Peak Grounds and Design, according to the state business filings I pulled that same day, was a man named Curtis Voss, her brother. I sat there a long time with that pencil in my hand, doing the kind of math you don't forget. She hadn't cut down my family's windbreak because it was ugly. She'd cut it down because dead trees don't sell houses, and clear mountain views do. And because every truckload of sod and sprinkler pipe that went into that clubhouse lawn put money back in her own family's pocket. That's when I understood I wasn't dealing with a bossy woman on a power trip. I was dealing with a fraud. And the trees were just the part of it I happened to be standing next to. I drove home slow that evening, and when I passed Arlene Kowalski's place, I saw her out on the porch again, oxygen tank at her side, staring at the bare gap where the windbreak used to run along the road like a missing tooth in an old man's smile. They came by here yesterday, she told me when I pulled in. Regina and that little man who does the yard work. Told me if I signed a statement saying your dead trees had been a fire hazard for years, they'd waive my fines. The gnome, the grass. What'd you tell her? Arlene looked at me for a second, tubing hissing soft under her nose, and something in her face reminded me of my grandmother, the same flat refusal to be pushed. I told her Frank flew 2 tours in Vietnam so people like her could lie without getting shot for it. And then I told her to get off my porch. I laughed for the first time in almost 2 weeks, but underneath it, I felt that cold, quiet thing settle back into my chest, because I understood now that Regina Voss wasn't just going to threaten me, she was already threatening a 78-year-old widow on oxygen to protect $840,000 she had no legal right to. I went home that night and started a new folder. This one I labelled in block letters, Evidence. I sat at the kitchen table that night with both folders open side by side. The manila one thick with fine notices and photographs, the new one still thin, just 3 pages of purchase contracts and a printout of Curtis Voss's business filing. My coffee had gone cold hours ago and I hadn't noticed. Outside, the wind had picked up, that low, steady hum it gets in late October when it's practicing for winter. Sliding along ground that used to have 127 trees to slow it down and now had nothing at all. I thought about calling my daughter, Beth, who lives down in Billings and worries about me more than I let on, but it was near 10 o'clock and I didn't want her hearing the anger in my voice before I'd had a chance to put it somewhere useful. So instead, I called Arlene. "You still up?" I asked when she answered. "Dale, I'm 78. I sleep 4 hours a night and call it luxury." I heard the hiss of her oxygen line, steady as a metronome. "What'd you find?" I told her. Not all of it. I didn't have all of it yet, but enough. The strip of land that never left my family's deed. The $840,000 in view premiums. Her brother's landscaping company billing double. There was a long quiet on the line. Long enough I thought maybe the call had dropped. "Frank used to say," Arlene finally said, "that the worst thieves are the ones who make you feel stupid for noticing you've been robbed. That's her. That's exactly her." Her voice cracked a little, not from sadness, I don't think, but from something closer to relief. "I thought it was just me she was picking on, the gnome, the grass. I thought I was just an old woman she'd decided to bully because I couldn't fight back so good anymore." "You're not the only one, Arlene." "No," she said, "but I might be the one she regrets picking on the most." I didn't know yet how true that would turn out to be. I told her to keep her porch light on, to write down every visit from Regina or anybody connected to the board, times and dates, same as I'd been doing. She said she still had a spiral notebook from Frank's old flight logs, half empty, and she'd start using the back pages. After I hung up, I walked out onto my own porch in the cold, no jacket, just to stand where the windbreak used to block the worst of the wind. It came straight off the open range now, nothing to slow it, nothing to bend it, whistling low through the fence wire the way I imagine it must have sounded before my great-grandfather ever put a shovel in this ground. I stood there a long time, feeling that wind on my face, and I thought about Eli Hutchins walking this same ground in 1911, watching a neighbor's cattle disappear into a coulee, deciding that day that no wind would ever again get a clean run at what he loved. I went back inside and started writing down everything I'd need to prove it. The blizzard came on a Thursday, the second week of November, faster than the forecast said it would. I remember the exact time the power flickered because I was standing at my kitchen window watching snow come sideways across the yard where the windbreak used to stand. 3:47 p.m., the digital clock on my stove blinking once before it caught the generator. 9 days after that certified letter, 26 days after the chainsaws. Without the trees, the wind had nothing left to fight. It came straight off 4 miles of open range, picked up every loose flake between here and the mountains, and dumped it all in one place. The low cut where the access road ran between my property and the first row of Cedar Hollow houses. By 6 that evening, the drift across that road stood taller than my truck. By midnight, it stood taller than my house. I have lived through 40 blizzards on this ranch. I have never seen a drift like that one, because I had never before lived on a ranch where somebody had removed 100 years of windbreak 19 days before the first storm of the season. By morning, 41 houses were sealed in. Not stuck, sealed. The county plow made 2 attempts and turned back both times, the driver telling dispatch over the radio that he'd never seen a drift refuse to clear like that, packed hard as concrete by wind with no trees to break its structure. I know this because I got the transcript later, during discovery. I want you to sit with that phrase for a second. No trees to break its structure. Because that's the whole case, right there, in a county plow driver's own words. Arlene Kowalski's oxygen concentrator ran on backup battery for 6 hours before it gave out. Her supplemental tanks, she kept 4 on hand. Standard practice for anybody living alone on oxygen out here, got her through the rest of that day and into the next morning. Her delivery truck, the one that was supposed to restock her Friday, made it as far as the county road before the driver called her apologizing, saying he physically could not get a truck through 11 feet of packed snow to reach her door. I found this out because Arlene called me at 7:15 a.m., her voice thin, not panicked exactly, but careful in the way people get when they're doing math on how many hours of air they have left. "Dale," she said, "I'm down to 1 tank." I put on every piece of cold weather gear I owned and walked the 1/4 mile to her place on foot, post-holing through drifts up to my thigh in places the wind had scoured the road bare and dumped everything else in one merciless wall. It took me 40 minutes to make a walk that usually takes 8. I got to her door and she opened it looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, wrapped in Frank's old army blanket, tubing looped over her ears same as always, but her hands were shaking. I called the volunteer fire department. They came by snowmobile 2 hours later with a fresh tank and got her stabilized. Nobody died that day, but I want to be honest about how close that margin was, because I don't think Regina Voss ever once, in all her talk about premium views and clean sightlines, considered that the windbreak she cut down for a marketing photo was the only thing standing between a widowed veteran and running out of air on her own kitchen floor. That's the moment I stopped thinking about this as a property dispute. Regina, to her credit, did try to organize an emergency response, though I'd come to understand later that her motives ran less toward neighborly duty and more toward liability. She hired a private contractor out of Livingston, a man named Buck Denny with a heavy loader, and on the second morning after the storm, I watched from my kitchen window as Buck's rig rolled up to the drift at the exact spot where the road narrowed between my land and the HOA's, the 60-foot strip Carol Spear had found still sitting on my family's deed. I'd already sent the notice by then. 2 days earlier. The moment I'd confirmed the boundary with a licensed surveyor out of Bozeman, I'd had my attorney draft a formal letter to the Hollow Creek Homeowners Association, certified mail, return receipt requested, informing them that the access corridor along the historical wagon road was private property belonging to Hutchins Ranch, and that any entry, excavation, or equipment operation on that strip required my written consent under Montana Code Annotated Section 45-6-203, Criminal Trespass to Property. I'd also filed the surveyor's plat with the county recorder, making the boundary a matter of public record, and I'd posted signage along the strip, orange placards visible from 50 yards, reading, "Private property, no trespassing, permission required for entry." Here's what most homeowners don't know. Once you've put a landowner on formal written notice of a boundary and posted it accordingly, any subsequent entry isn't a misunderstanding anymore. It's not a civil matter you settle with a stern letter. It becomes a criminal act, provable with nothing more than a timestamp and a witness. And it doesn't matter one bit whether the trespasser believed, in good faith, that the road belonged to the county or the HOA. Belief isn't a defense once you've been served. Regina Voss had received that certified letter 3 days before Buck Denny's loader ever touched that snow. I had the green return card to prove it, signed by her own hand, dated and delivered. I watched Buck's loader push into the drift anyway, blade grinding down through packed snow, and I watched Regina standing beside her Range Rover in a parka that looked like it had never seen actual weather, clipboard held against her chest like a shield, directing him forward with sharp little gestures of her gloved hand. I didn't run out and shout at her. I'd learned that lesson already. Instead, I picked up my phone and I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line, and I said, calm as I could manage, "This is Dale Hutchins out at Hutchins Ranch. I've got an active criminal trespass in progress on posted, deeded private property, and I have prior written notice on file with your office. I'd like a deputy to respond and witness it directly, please." Then I picked up my camera, the good one, the one with the long lens I use for photographing elk in the fall, and I went out onto my porch and I filmed every second of it. Buck's loader crossing the survey stake I'd driven in 2 days before. The orange placard knocked flat under his tread. Regina's clipboard, her parka, her gloved hand waving him forward, all of it time-stamped, 9:52 a.m., Saturday. Deputy Marsh arrived 11 minutes later, and I want you to picture this. Regina Voss, still directing traffic with her clipboard, turning around to find a Park County Sheriff's cruiser idling behind her, lights not even on, just parked, a deputy stepping out with a notepad in one hand and my certified mail receipt in the other, because I'd emailed it to the department the moment I got off the phone. "Ma'am," Deputy Marsh said, "I'm going to need you to have that equipment operator stop where he is." I stood on my porch with my camera still running, and for the first time since the chainsaws started, I let myself feel something close to satisfaction. Not victory, not yet, just the quiet, settled feeling of a trap built right. Permits filed, notices served, surveyor's plat recorded, sheriff on scene, camera rolling, every piece exactly where it needed to be, waiting for Regina Voss to walk into it on her own. She didn't disappoint me. She didn't disappoint me. Deputy Marsh cited Regina Voss for criminal trespass that Saturday morning, right there in the snow, with Buck Denny's loader idling behind her and my camera still rolling from the porch. She signed the citation with her gloved hand shaking, not from the cold, and I noticed she didn't look at me once the whole time. But a citation for trespass wasn't the end of anything. It was the door I'd been building toward for 3 weeks. I called an emergency meeting of the Hollow Creek Homeowners Association myself, which I had every legal right to do as an owner of record within the association's boundary by virtue of that 60-foot strip, filed under the association's own bylaws, requiring the board to convene within 10 days of a petition signed by 5% of members. Arlene helped me get the signatures. Turned out I didn't need to convince anybody. 41 houses had spent 3 days sealed behind a wall of snow because of what Regina Voss had done, and every single homeowner I approached signed without a single question. We held it in the county extension building in town because Regina refused to open the clubhouse for a meeting she hadn't called, and I'd made sure ahead of time that wasn't going to be a problem. I'd contacted the Park County Sheriff's Office, informed them I intended to present evidence of trespass and potential fraud, and asked that a deputy be present as a peace officer of record. I'd also called Janet Ferris, a reporter I'd known for years at the Livingston paper, and told her, plainly, that I thought this was a story worth her time. I didn't tell her everything, I just told her enough. The room was packed by 7 that evening. Fold-out chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, the smell of wet wool coats and instant cocoa somebody had set up on a folding table by the door. Arlene sat in the front row with her oxygen tank beside her, Frank's old army pin fixed to her coat collar, and I sat one chair over, a banker's box of documents between my feet. Regina came in 11 minutes late, blazer pressed, clipboard in hand like always, and I watched her face when she saw the deputy standing quietly near the back wall, and the reporter with a notepad open in the second row, and 41 of her homeowners staring at her without a shred of the polite deference she'd grown used to. "This meeting was not properly noticed," she started. "It was noticed under Article 9 of your own bylaws," I said, standing up. "Signed by 5% of the membership, which I have right here, along with the sheriff's incident report from Saturday and a certified survey plat recorded with the county 11 days ago. I laid it all out plain, the way you'd walk somebody through a fence line, post by post. I showed the plat, the 60-foot strip that had never left the Hutchins deed since 1899, the fact that the county's easement for the access road had technically lapsed in 1971 and never been re-recorded when the HOA assumed maintenance, which meant the strip where the Windbreak stood and where Buck Denny's loader had trespassed belonged to me outright, no obligation on my part to maintain it, clear it, or grant anyone passage across it beyond what basic necessity and human decency required. Somebody in the back row said, quiet enough that everybody heard it anyway. So she didn't even have the right to cut those trees down in the first place. No, I said, she didn't. Then I put the second stack on the table, the purchase agreements. 14 lots, $60,000 to $72,000 in view premiums each, $840,000 collected in 5 months. The landscaping contract with Silver Peak Grounds and Design, billed at nearly double market rate, registered to Curtis Voss, Regina's own brother. Regina's face went the color of the snow still piled outside the windows. "This is a private business matter," she said, voice thin now, none of the clubhouse confidence left in it. "You have no standing to." "I filed a formal complaint with the county attorney's office 6 days ago," I said, "along with copies of everything you're looking at right now." That's when Deputy Marsh stepped forward from the back wall, and I watched every head in that room turn to follow him, and I watched Regina Voss understand, in the space of about 2 seconds, exactly what was happening. He read her the charges quiet and even, the way professionals do, no drama in his voice at all. Felony theft by deception under Montana Code Annotated, Section 45-6-301, and criminal trespass related to Saturday's incident. He asked her to stand. She looked, for just a moment, at her clipboard still sitting on the table in front of her, like it might explain something to the room on her behalf, and then she stood, and Janet Ferris's camera flash went off twice, and 41 homeowners watched the woman who'd fined a widow for a garden gnome get walked out of a county extension building in handcuffs into the cold. Curtis Voss was charged 3 weeks later with conspiracy to commit fraud tied to the inflated landscaping contract. He took a plea deal, agreed to testify against his sister, paid restitution, and lost his contractor's license permanently. Buck Denny, the equipment operator, was never charged. He cooperated fully once he understood what he'd been standing in the middle of, told investigators plainly that Regina had assured him the road belonged to the association, and his testimony became one of the pieces that sealed her trespass charge tight. Regina Voss pleaded guilty 8 months later rather than face trial, once her attorney saw the full weight of what the county attorney's office had assembled. The court ordered restitution of $840,000 to the 14 affected homeowners for the fraudulent view premiums and an additional $210,000 to the HOA itself for the overbilled landscaping contract with her brother's company. On the timber trespass claim I'd filed separately in civil court, we settled for $180,000. Real money, but far less than the full treble damages the statute allowed, because by then, the number I cared about most wasn't attached to the trees at all. Total, when everything was said and paid, Regina Voss owed just over $1,200,000. Less than 15% of that was ever about the trees. The rest was money she'd simply stolen from people who trusted her to run their community honestly. She served 14 months in the Montana Women's Prison in Billings and was permanently barred, under the terms of her plea, from serving on the board of any homeowners association registered in the state. Arlene Kowalski was elected HOA president that spring unopposed. The same 41 households who'd once watched Regina fine her for a garden gnome now asking her to run their community. Her first act in office was a unanimous board vote waiving her own dues permanently and adding language to the covenants guaranteeing priority snow removal access for any resident with a documented medical need. Her second act was formally thanking me, in writing, on behalf of the association for granting them a permanent easement across the 60-foot strip, $1 a year, renewable, on the sole condition that any future landscaping decisions affecting my family's original Windbreak line required a 2/3 vote and my written consent. I replanted that windbreak the following spring, 130 saplings this time, cottonwood and blue spruce, using part of the timber trespass settlement to pay for it. They're small yet, knee-high most of them, thin as fence posts, nothing like the towering rows Eli put in over a century ago. But I go up to the aspen rise most mornings still, coffee in hand, and I can see them from up there, standing in their careful, staggered rows, exactly the way he laid them out, and I think it'll take another 80 years before anybody standing where I stand can really feel what they're for. Arlene and I still sit on her porch some evenings, her oxygen line hissing soft and steady, and she likes to remind me that Frank always said the worst thieves are the ones who make you feel foolish for noticing you've been robbed. I think about that a lot now. I think about what almost happened to a good woman on oxygen because somebody wanted a better photograph for a sales brochure. Here's what I learned, if it's worth anything to you. Boards can vote on almost anything, but a vote doesn't create a right that was never there to begin with. Silence isn't surrender, it's just paperwork you haven't filed yet. And the people who bully the most vulnerable folks in a community are very often the same people stealing the most from everybody else, because cruelty and theft usually travel together wearing the same clipboard. One more thing I learned, and I'll leave you with it. About 4 months after Regina's sentencing, I got a letter from a county surveyor's office 2 counties over, asking about an old grazing easement on a ranch that used to belong to my mother's family before she married my father. An easement, it turns out, that another homeowners association out there has been quietly building a golf cart path across for 6 years without anybody's permission at all. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do about that one, but I've already started a folder. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do about that one, but I've already started a folder. I keep thinking about the night before that extension building meeting though, because I don't think I've told you the whole truth of how I felt walking in there. I want to because I think it matters. I sat at my grandfather's table until nearly 1 in the morning, the banker's box packed and ready by the door, and I remember running my thumb along one of the old knife scars in the walnut, the deep one my father used to say was his doing, some argument with a Sunday roast when he was 9 years old. I sat there and I asked myself a question I hadn't let myself ask the whole 3 weeks I'd spent building this case. What if I was wrong to want it this big? I could have taken the trespass citation and let the county handle it quiet. I could have taken my settlement on the timber and walked away with money in my pocket and no headlines, no reporter, no handcuffs in front of 41 neighbors. Some part of me, the part that still hears my father's voice telling me a Hutchins doesn't go looking for a fight, sat at that table and wondered if I'd let this become more about pride than about right. Then I thought about Arlene's hands shaking when she opened her door for me, her voice thin on the phone saying, "I'm down to 1 tank." And I thought about a woman with a clipboard standing in the cold, directing a loader across land she'd already been told, in writing, wasn't hers to touch. And I understood, sitting there in the quiet, with the wind still finding its way through gaps where trees used to stand, that this had stopped being about pride the moment that oxygen truck couldn't get through. It had become about making sure nobody else's grandmother spent a night doing math on how many hours of air she had left because somebody wanted a better view for a sales brochure. I didn't sleep much, but I stopped doubting myself somewhere around 3 in the morning, coffee gone cold again, box packed by the door. The morning after Regina's arrest, half of Cedar Hollow showed up at my fence line, which had never happened once in 19 years of that subdivision existing next to my ranch. A man named Pete Alvarez, who'd bought one of those View Premium lots and never known a dime of it was fraud, stood there, turning his hat in his hands and said, "I feel like a fool, Dale. I paid $68,000 extra for a view I didn't know came from stolen trees." "You didn't know," I told him. "That's the whole point. She made sure you didn't." A woman I only knew by sight, from 2 doors down from Arlene, brought over a casserole dish, which struck me as a strange thing to do for a man who'd just watched somebody get arrested, but I understood it well enough. People don't always know how to say thank you for something that big. Sometimes it comes out as a casserole. Arlene held court on her porch for most of that week, oxygen hissing, telling anybody who'd listen that she'd known Regina Voss was rotten since the day she got cited for a garden gnome that had sat in that exact spot since 1987. "Frank gave me that gnome," she told Janet Ferris when the reporter came around for a follow-up piece. "Painted his little face myself. And she told me it violated the aesthetic character of the neighborhood." Arlene laughed when she said it, a real laugh, the kind that comes easier once the weight's off your chest. I planted a young cottonwood right at the edge of the old wagon road that same week, before the ground froze too hard to dig, right where the first of Eli's original trees had stood. Arlene came over with her tank and watched me tamp the dirt down around the roots, and she didn't say much, just stood there breathing steady in the cold, watching 100 years try to start over, one sapling at a time.